In the far northern mountains where winter moves like an ancient spirit and storms whisper old secrets across the snow, a single patrol changed everything. On a night when the world felt frozen in place, a quiet officer and his loyal German shepherd stumbled upon a mystery that would test the courage of an entire town. It began with one faint light blinking in the storm, and a discovery that no one in Frost Haven would ever forget. Before we begin this journey of hope and survival, I would love to know where you are watching from. Leave a comment to share your corner of the world, and let this story travel a little farther into the winter night. Winter had come to Frost Haven in the way old legends once warned, heavy as a cathedral bell, white as forgotten dreams, and cold enough to make the pines groan like tired elders. The town, hidden deep in the mountains of northern Wyoming, lay beneath a quilt of unbroken snow, its modest shops and steep-roofed homes reduced to soft silhouettes under the drifting night. Ridgepoint Pass, the only mountain road connecting Frost Haven to the outside world, had turned into a narrow ribbon carved through walls of windblown snow. It was a place where storms ruled with ancient authority, and every winter, patrol felt like a walk through the breath of a sleeping beast. On nights like this, Calder Hale knew the mountain was more alive than the town itself. Calder, age 37, had the look of a man the mountain had shaped. He was tall, with shoulders broadened by years of SAR training, and a beard that had grown prematurely silver along the jaw. His eyes, gray like river ice, carried the quiet weight of someone who had seen enough accidents in these passes to understand how fragile people could be against winter's cruelty. His temperament was calm, deliberate, patient. Colleagues said Calder never raised his voice, even when the world around him demanded panic. A childhood spent in foster homes had molded him into someone who valued steadiness over chaos, and nothing grounded him more than having a partner he could trust. That partner sat in the passenger seat tonight. Rook. Rook was a 5-year-old German shepherd with a deep black saddle, tan limbs, intelligent amber eyes, and a body built like an Olympic sprinter hidden beneath a winter K9 vest. He had earned certifications in search and rescue, tracking, and avalanche detection, a rare combination for small-town units. Calm with civilians, fierce with threats, Rook carried himself with quiet nobility, the kind of dog who looked like he had been carved out of loyalty itself. He also had a habit of resting his head on Calder's elbow when he sensed his handler thinking too much. The storm was building quickly. Snow whipped across the windshield in long, diagonal streaks, and the temperature gauge on the dashboard flickered between 18 and 20. Calder kept the patrol SUV at a crawl, headlights cutting a narrow tunnel through the white density. His job that night was deceptively simple: sweep the mountain road and ensure no motorists were stranded before the blizzard worsened. But simple tasks often became the kind that haunted him years later. Rook lifted his head suddenly, ears pricked, posture rigid. Calder glanced over. "You smell something?" The dog gave a low, controlled growl, not aggressive, but alert. The kind of sound he made only when something was wrong. Calder slowed the cruiser. Through the swirling snow, a faint red blink pulsed just beyond the guardrail, like a heartbeat trying not to die. Hazard lights. Calder steered carefully to the side, stopped, and pulled on his old parka. The wind hit him immediately, sharp, slicing, a living thing. The snow beneath his boots creaked with the brittle sound of deep cold. Rook jumped out beside him, nose high, breath forming small clouds. Down the slope, half buried in fresh snow, was an overturned SUV. The front end had plowed into a drift, windshield cracked like frozen spiderwebs. For a moment, the storm muffled everything but the rapid thud of Calder's pulse. He scanned the area with his flashlight. No movement outside, no footprints visible yet. The vehicle's back door was crumpled but accessible. Calder wrenched it open, letting out a gasp he didn't know he'd been holding. In the back seat, strapped into a rear-facing child seat, was a baby boy, no older than 10 months. His skin was pale, almost translucent under the emergency lamp glow. His lips were tinged blue, his breathing shallow and stuttering. The sight hit Calder like a fist. He reached in, fingers steady despite the rising fear. Attached to the diaper bag was a small medical card, Noah Maddox. Calder whispered the name aloud, grounding himself. Having the child's actual name, a real documented identity, sliced clean through the surreal fog of the moment. Babies did not belong in storms. Babies did not belong in wrecks on the edges of mountains. Rook stepped close and gave a soft, sympathetic whine, as though he too understood the gravity of what they had found. Calder unbuckled Noah with practiced gentleness, wrapped him in the emergency foil blanket, then added his own insulated coat around that. The baby didn't cry. That frightened him more than anything. "Okay, little guy," Calder murmured, pressing Noah against his chest to share what warmth he could. "Stay with me. We're getting you out of this." Rook trotted alongside as Calder climbed the slope, shielding the infant with his own body from the wind. Once inside the patrol SUV, Calder blasted the heater, set Noah in his lap securely against his torso, and grabbed the radio. "Dispatch, this is Hale. I've got a critical pediatric hypothermia, approx. 10 months old. Vehicle rollover at Ridge Point, lower turn, child breathing, but unstable. Request immediate prep at Frost Haven Medical." The reply crackled through static. "Copy, Officer Hale. Pediatric team is mobilizing." Calder drove with one hand, the other steadying Noah, conscious of every second ticking away. Rook moved behind the center console and rested his muzzle near the child, offering the soft, rhythmic reassurance that only a dog like Rook could give. 30 minutes felt like 3 hours. The wind worsened, buffeting the SUV, but Calder held his pace, keeping the wheels in the narrow ruts still visible through the snow. He pulled into Frost Haven Medical's emergency bay, and by the time the doors opened, the pediatric team was already rushing out. Leading them was Lila Bennett. Lila, 34, was a pediatric nurse practitioner whose presence alone seemed to warm the coldest room. She was average height, soft-featured, with curly dark blonde hair she always tied loosely at the back, and hazel eyes that carried both strength and perpetual empathy. She had grown up in Frost Haven, the daughter of a local schoolteacher, and was known for treating every child as though they were someone's entire universe. A car accident in her teens had left her with a thin scar along her collarbone, a quiet reminder of how quickly life could tilt. That event was what drove her into pediatric care. Tonight, even exhausted from double shifts, she moved with purpose. Calder handed Noah over without a word. Lila pressed a hand to the baby's cheek, her expression tightening. "Get him warmed. Controlled rewarming protocol. CBC, electrolytes, blood gas. Let Dr. Arendt know we're starting now." The team swept Noah into the ER, leaving Calder standing in the heavy corridor light, snow melting off his coat. Rook pressed against his leg, watching the automatic doors close behind the infant. Only when the boy was gone from sight did Calder feel the tension in his chest loosen just enough for breath to return. He turned back into the storm. There had been no adult in the SUV, no footprints beside the car, no signs of departure. That meant something else lay waiting on that mountain, something far worse than an accident. Calder returned to the wreckage with Rook beside him, their silhouettes swallowed by the falling snow. What he found when he arrived would shape every step that followed. Blood dried on the doorframe, drag marks on the floor mats, and a trail of footprints leading not toward the road, but away from it, into the deep forest. The storm roared as though trying to erase the truth, but Calder had seen enough winters to know that the mountain didn't hide cruelty. It revealed it. And somewhere in those frozen trees, the parents of baby Noah Maddox were fighting a battle the storm alone could not explain. The storm had not slept through the night. It had paced across the mountains like a restless spirit, beating its frozen wings against the roofs of Frost Haven until dawn bled pale gold through the snow-heavy clouds. By morning, the flakes had thinned from a blizzard's roar to a weary whisper, drifting in spirals that caught on the branches of towering pines. Ridgepoint Pass remained half-buried, its guardrails crowned with ice, its asphalt hidden beneath a white sheet that only the bravest tire marks dared to disturb. Calder Hale returned to the wrecked SUV just after sunrise, accompanied by a small search and rescue team. The cold pressed down on the group like a warning. His breath hung in front of him, turning to frost as quickly as the thoughts forming behind his eyes. Rook trotted beside him, movements efficient, ears alert. The German shepherd's wound from the night before had been checked. No injury, only snow burn and exhaustion. And he had recovered his usual precision. Calder knelt beside him, adjusting the dog's tracking harness. The quiet between them was a familiar language, built through years of storms and missing persons. Rook was a creature of sharp instinct, But he also had that rare trait seen only in a handful of working dogs: empathy woven into discipline. He worked because he understood the stakes. Behind Calder, the rest of the team prepared themselves. There were 2 police officers, Mara Ellison and Grant Tobin, and 1 rescue worker, Rowan Hale. Mara was a lean woman in her early 40s with quick eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, the kind of person who looked at a problem like it was a knot she intended to cut cleanly. Grant, in contrast, had a broad build and a calm, slow way of speaking. He had once been a high school defensive lineman, and he still carried himself with that protective solidity. Rowan Hale, the rescue worker, was the youngest, barely 30, tall and wiry, with sandy hair tucked beneath a beanie, known for his deep knowledge of avalanche probabilities and his tendency to hum under his breath when nervous. Calder briefed them quickly, pointing toward the vehicle. "We're looking for 2 adults. No sign they walked back toward the road." Mara nodded. "Meaning they went into the woods." "Meaning something forced them there," Calder corrected. The 4 of them moved carefully around the SUV. Morning light revealed details the storm had hidden the previous night. Dried blood streaked faintly across the driver's doorframe, small handprints smudged on the half-shattered glass, and drag marks on the vehicle's floor. Marks that led toward the passenger side before disappearing into churned snow. It was not the chaos of an animal attack. It had direction, intention. Rook sniffed along the path, nose low, breath forming small clouds. Then he stopped abruptly, ears pivoting toward the tree line. Calder followed the invisible line of his dog's focus. There, barely visible beneath a dusting of new snow, lay footprints, human, adult, several steps leading deeper into the forest of frost-hardened pines. Rowan crouched beside them. "The prints are from last night. Wind covered part of them, but they haven't been exposed long." Calder made his decision. "We follow, slow and steady, signal the road unit to stay at the turnout in case weather shifts again." The team adjusted their radios and gear. Each carried GPS markers, thin red stakes used to create a breadcrumb trail through blinding weather, as well as high-power flashlights and compact emergency kits. Calder took point with Rook. The forest greeted them with a cold silence. The pines towered overhead like ancient sentinels, their branches bending under the weight of fresh snow. Each step the team took sank deep into the powder. Rook's tracks formed clean, confident lines, and Calder let the dog move at half-lead, trusting him to interpret scents buried beneath ice. The footprints faded in places where wind had carved the ground raw. At times, Rook paused, circling to reacquire the trail. Other times, he surged forward, pulling lightly on the lead, guiding them with small huffs of determination. 200 yards into the forest, the terrain shifted. Rocks jutted from the snow like dark bones, and the wind funneled between them, creating small funnels of drifting powder. Rowan paused, scanning the slope. "There's a risk of small slides from that ridge," he warned. "If the temperature rises even a few degrees, this snow crust could give way." Calder weighed the risk. The prince continued forward, dipping into a shallow gully. Rook lowered his head and growled softly. Not aggressive, concerned. Calder's pulse quickened. The dog had never growled at terrain, only at stories left behind. They followed the trail down into the narrow hollow. Snow muffled every sound, making their movements feel as though they were trespassing on a sacred place. At the bottom of the dip, Rook lunged forward, barking once, sharp and urgent. The team scrambled after him. Beneath a massive pine tree, its trunk thick enough to shield 4 people, lay 2 adults tied upright against the bark, Evan Maddox and Hannah Maddox. Their names were not yet known to the team, but the truth of their identity hung in the air like a fragile breath. Hannah was a woman in her early 30s, petite, with chestnut hair plastered to her cheeks from frozen sweat. Her eyelashes were rimmed with ice, and her lips were cracked in thin, trembling lines. She would have been vibrant under ordinary circumstances, her features gentle, her eyes naturally expressive, but the cold had muted every trace of color. Her personality, as later recounted, was warm and trusting, shaped by a life spent helping her sister run a community library. But tonight, she was reduced to instinct, survival, fear, and the faint whisper of a mother's hope. Evan was taller, with a sturdy build and dark hair that had frosted completely white around the edges. His jaw was clenched, eyes half open but unfocused, A man who, under normal conditions, carried himself with a quiet, reliable strength. He worked construction and was known among friends for fixing anything without complaint. But here he looked hollowed out by the cold. Both were bound by coarse rope, wrists tied behind the trunk, snow piled around their boots. Their breath came out in thin, fragile threads. Rowan was the first to kneel between them, immediately assessing skin temperature and responsiveness. "Severe hypothermia," he muttered, "but they're alive. Barely." Mara cut the rope with a small knife, while Grant unfolded one of the insulated rescue wraps. Calder lowered himself in front of Hannah. Her eyes fluttered open, and she mouthed something. No voice, just the shape of a single word. Noah. Calder nodded gently. "He's safe. He's alive." A tear froze before it could fall. The team worked quickly. Oxygen tubes were fitted, heating packs activated. They eased the couple onto lightweight rescue sleds, custom-made for deep snow extractions, and secured the straps. Every motion was efficient, practiced, but underscored with quiet urgency. The storm had calmed, but dusk would return early. In weather like this, the mountains imposed strict deadlines. As they began the slow ascent out of the hollow, Rook trotted beside the sleds, glancing back periodically as if counting their breaths. Calder could feel the dog's tension, his instincts picking up every weak heartbeat, every faltering inhale behind them. The trek back took nearly an hour. By the time they reached the turnout, the sky had dimmed to a deep bruised purple, and the temperature had dipped again. Emergency vehicles waited with heaters running, doors open, medics ready. Evan and Hannah were lifted carefully inside, their bodies still shivering beneath the insulated covers. Calder stood by the doors as they closed, Rook pressed against his leg. He watched the ambulance pull away. Sirens muted to avoid disturbing snow conditions, but lights casting long reflections on the ice. For a moment he stayed there, breathing out slow, steady clouds. Rook nudged his hand once. Gentle, grounding, Calder knelt to meet the dog's eyes. "We got them," he murmured. "But someone did this. Someone put them out here." Rook's ears lifted, as if he agreed. They drove back to Frost Haven Medical in convoy. Snow began to fall again. Thin at first, then heavier, as though the mountain wanted to reclaim the secrets they had uncovered. Inside the hospital, Lila Bennett updated Calder with a hint of relief. Baby Noah's temperature was rising, his color returning. A small victory, fragile but real. Calder stood at the NICU window, Rook sitting faithfully at his boot. Beyond the glass, machines hummed softly around the tiny child, fighting his way back to warmth. "Someone tried to erase this family," Calder whispered, though not to anyone in particular. Rook rested his head against Calder's knee. The storm outside continued to gather its strength, but inside the hospital, for the first time since the night began, there was warmth enough to hope. Yet, Calder knew the footprints in the pines were not just a trail. They were the beginning of something deeper, darker, and far from over. Morning rose slowly over Frost Haven, its first light muted by the remnants of the blizzard still clinging to the mountains. The sky looked like a faded watercolor, lavender fading into blue, while the wind carried a brittle quietness that only comes after a storm has screamed itself empty. Calder Hale stood beside the Sayar staging area near the hospital parking lot, tightening the straps of his pack as the reinforced search team prepared to move out again. The knowledge that Evan and Hannah were alive had stirred something fierce yet fragile inside him, like a spark sheltered in cupped hands. But the mountain still held secrets, and the storm had taken enough liberties already. Rook waited beside him, breath fogging into the cold air. The dog had rested only a few hours, curled faithfully at Calder's bedside, and now carried himself with renewed determination. His gait was steady, his eyes bright with the sharp awareness of purpose. Snowflakes clung to his fur in tiny white constellations. Around them, additional rescue members unloaded equipment: foldable rescue sleds, battery heaters, thermal blankets, oxygen units, GPS beacons, and avalanche poles. The newcomers included Nora Jensen, an experienced medic with a calm presence, and Elias Dorn, a middle-aged search technician with graying hair and a scholarly demeanor, formerly a geography teacher before moving to rescue operations. Calder appreciated their steadiness. Storms demanded not just skill, but temperament. The mountain rewarded only those who approached it with respect. Maps were spread across the hood of a rescue truck. Elias traced out topographical lines with a gloved finger. If the couple survived the night tied to that pine, the wind might have shifted enough that their scents, their heat signatures, even their falls in the snow, might still be traceable. And if not, Nora asked quietly. Elias folded the map. Then we read the mountain, and we trust the dog. Rook gave a short, confident chuff, as if acknowledging the vote of confidence. The team departed in staggered formation, leaving the road behind as they stepped into the labyrinth of frost-caked pines. Every breath felt like it might crystallize before leaving their lungs. Calder led the way, Rook slightly ahead, following the breadcrumb trail of coordinates he and the team had set the day before. The pines stretched tall around them, dark, ancient pillars that filtered the morning light into thin ribbons. Snow lay deep, and the cold pressed close, but the world here was quieter, gentler than the shrieking winds of last night. It felt strangely like walking through the hollowed heart of winter itself. Rook stopped suddenly beside one of the markers. His ears flicked forward. His nose touched the indentation of an old footprint, half swallowed by new snow. Calder crouched beside him and whispered, "Go on, boy. Find the rest." The dog resumed tracking, zigzagging between trees, weaving through. Clusters of undergrowth frost-bound into sculptural shapes. Hours passed with slow but steady progress. Occasionally, the team paused to check their coordinates, adjust their formation, or listen to the mutters of shifting ice on the higher ridge. Eventually, the forest thinned, giving way to a narrow valley carved by centuries of winter storms. The wind softened here, almost reverent. Calder felt Rook's tension increase, subtle but unmistakable. The dog's tail stiffened, his breath quickened. He whined softly, then barked once, sharp, echoing off the stone walls of the valley. "He's got something," Calder said. They followed Rook around a massive pine, whose roots curled above the snow like the gnarled hands of an old guardian. And there, tucked beneath the sweeping boughs, where the snow fell more lightly, were Evan and Hannah Maddox, still leaning against the trunk where the storm had left them hours before. Though freed from their bindings last night, the couple had been too weakened by the cold to move on their own. The warmth of rescue blankets and oxygen from the night before had bought them time, but the cold had reclaimed much of it with merciless insistence. Hannah's face was pale, her eyelids heavy, but her breathing was steadier than when Calder last saw her. Evan's posture had improved slightly, his head lifted weakly when the team approached. They were still deep in hypothermia, still fragile as fallen leaves, but unmistakably alive. Rook approached gently, sniffing them with a careful sweep of his nose. He seemed to exhale relief, and then sat beside Calder, ears pinned forward as if waiting for instructions. Nora and Elias moved quickly to assess the couple's conditions. Nora checked Hannah's pulse and temperature, while Elias examined Evan's motor responses. "They're cold," Nora said, "but they're stabilizing. We need to get them moving along the extraction path before fatigue pulls them down again." Calder nodded and knelt beside Hannah. She looked up at him through cracked lashes, lips trembling as she whispered the same words she'd tried to speak the night before. "Noah." "He's safe," Calder reassured softly. "He's at the hospital. He's warm. They're taking good care of him." Hannah's eyes glossed, not with tears, they would have frozen, but with a kind of trembling gratitude. Evan exhaled, a shallow but relieved sound. With practiced coordination, the team set up 2 rescue sleds. The insulated canvas cradled the couple gently, while Nora monitored oxygen flow and rewarming protocols. Rook remained alert, pacing around the sleds as if he were personally responsible for escorting them from the mountain. The extraction was long and slow, the climb back out of the valley challenging under the weight of deep snow. Calder took the lead rope of Hannah's sled, guiding it carefully over uneven terrain. Grant and Elias handled Evan's sled, while Rowan scouted ahead for any signs of instability in the ridge. Rook alternated between walking beside Calder and circling the perimeter, keeping constant watch. By the time they reached the main slope, fresh flakes had begun falling again, soft, drifting reminders that winter never loosened its grip fully. But the sky was brighter than yesterday, and that alone felt like a quiet blessing. At the edge of the forest, emergency vehicles waited, engines humming warmth into the frozen air. Medics received Evan and Hannah and loaded them gently into the heated interiors of two separate ambulances. Calder followed behind, Rook stepping closely at his heel. He didn't speak as the doors closed. Sometimes silence was the only language the moment allowed. When Calder and Rook arrived at the hospital, Frost Haven Medical was quiet in the late afternoon hush. Inside the pediatric wing, Lila Bennett approached them with a hopeful expression, dark blonde curls escaping her ponytail, cheeks flushed from hours of uninterrupted work. "Calder," she said softly. "Noah's temperature has been rising steadily. His breathing has evened out, still fragile, but much better than last night." Calder let out a slow breath. Relief didn't come as a sudden rush. It came like thawing ice, slowly releasing tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Lila noticed him glance toward the NICU window. "Go ahead," she encouraged. Calder stepped to the glass. Rook sat beside him again, head lowered in gentle curiosity. Inside the soft-lit room, Noah lay wrapped in warming blankets, tiny chest rising and falling with more rhythm than before. Machines beeped in steady patterns, tiny metronomes of life continuing. Calder's hand hovered above the glass. "Someone planned this," he murmured. "Someone left them out there. This wasn't random." Rook pressed his head against Calder's knee in wordless agreement. Snow continued falling outside the hospital, a quiet curtain closing the chapter of the storm. But, for Calder, the story was only just beginning. The footprints in the pines had shown him the path, but the forest had more to tell, and the truth waited somewhere behind the next veil of winter wind. Storms have a way of erasing footprints, but they never erase intent. By the time the third morning arrived, Ridgepoint Pass had been plowed into a narrow ribbon of black asphalt, threading through white wilderness. The pines bowed beneath fresh snow, like penitents at prayer. Frost Haven itself had begun to stir again. Chimneys breathing thin wisps of smoke, salt trucks moving in slow, deliberate arcs, and townsfolk scraping ice from storefronts, while murmuring updates about the rescued infant and the parents who had clung to life in the trees. But the mountain, for all its temporary silence, still felt unsettled. Inside Frost Haven Medical, Evan and Hannah Maddox were finally conscious enough for conversation. That morning, Calder Hale walked down the corridor with Rook at heel, passing nurses whispering about the miracle family who had survived a night tied to a tree. Calder paused at the threshold of their room. Soft sunlight leaked through blinds, painting pale stripes across two recovery beds. Hannah lay propped against pillows, her skin no longer frost gray, but still fragile. Evan sat upright, wrapped in blankets, his fingers trembling slightly as he held a cup of warm broth. Lila Bennett, their attending nurse, stood nearby, checking vitals, her presence calm and steady as always. She gave Calder an encouraging nod. The couple greeted him with tired smiles, an instinctive gesture from two people who had nearly lost everything. Calder sat gently in the chair between their beds, Rook lowering himself on the floor beside him. "We need to talk about what happened on the road," Calder began quietly. Hannah exchanged a slow, apprehensive look with Evan. Her voice was faint, but clearer than it had been the day before. We truly thought we would die out there." Evan took her hand. "We were driving home from my sister-in-law's place," he said, his voice roughened by cold and exhaustion. The storm was already bad, but GPS said Ridgepoint Pass would be faster than the longer route. "It wasn't reckless," Hannah added, as if defending him. "We've driven that road many times." "Then we saw them," Evan continued. "Two men standing by a truck on the side of the road, hood up. One of them, he was limping, leaning on the other. They waved us down like they were desperate." Calder felt the air in the room tighten. "Did they give names?" "No," Hannah whispered. But when Evan stepped out to help, the limping one, he pulled a gun. Evan's jaw hardened. The younger one looked nervous. He kept saying it was just supposed to be quick, a scare, a robbery. But the older one, he was cold, ruthless. He knew exactly what he was doing. "They took our wallets," Hannah whispered. "Our phones, Evan's keys. When I begged them not to leave Noah in the car, the younger one hesitated. I saw it in his eyes. He didn't want to do this. But the older man, he said," she swallowed hard, "if the kid's strong, someone will find him." A tremor passed through her at the memory. Calder leaned forward. "Did they harm either of you?" "No," Evan said. "Not directly. They tied us and dragged us into the woods. It was fast. They acted like they'd done it before. Calder didn't respond for a moment, but Rook seemed to sense the shift in his handler's heartbeat. The dog pressed closer, resting his head on Calder's boot. "Thank you," Calder finally said. "You've told us more than you know." After a few more questions, he left the room, Lila giving him a small, reassuring squeeze on the arm. Outside in the hallway, Lieutenant Frank Mercer waited. Frank Mercer was a man whose presence filled any room he entered. In his early 50s, he stood tall with the posture of a former Marine, his broad shoulders stretching the seams of his winter uniform. His hair, dark with streaks of iron gray, was always kept short, and his eyes carried the sharpness of someone who'd spent a lifetime reading danger before it erupted. Mercer had a reputation for being both fair and unyielding, a commander who demanded precision because he expected it of himself first. "Well?" Mercer asked. Calder summarized quickly. When he was done, Mercer exhaled long, rubbing his hand over his jaw. "That confirms it," he said. This wasn't a one-off. They headed to the precinct. The storm outside was light, flakes drifting like ash from a dying fire. Inside the conference room, boards had been set up with map pins, notes, and printed photos. Mercer pointed to a cluster of red-circled locations along the mountain range. 3 robberies in the last month, he said. All on back roads, all during storms. Same pattern, stranded vehicle ruse, 2 suspects, cash and keys stolen. But this, he tapped a photo of the overturned SUV. "This is escalation." Calder studied the images. "Any suspects?" Mercer clicked to another slide on the monitor. 2 faces appeared, men captured on a grainy gas station security camera. One was tall, angular, unshaven, with piercing eyes and a stiffness in his stance as though one leg bothered him. The other was younger, early 20s, nervous, glancing at the older man as if seeking approval. "Hank Dillard," Mercer said, pointing to the tall one. Ex-mechanic, known for some petty thefts downstate. Got laid off this year, vanished 2 months ago. He pointed to the younger one. Travis Klein. No convictions, but he's bounced around from job to job. Roommates with Hank for a while. Calder squinted at the limp. "Matches what Hannah described." Mercer nodded. "And the gas station clerk from Bighorn Junction, 50 miles out, remembers them. They used a stolen fuel card, stopped for supplies." "So, they're working a pattern," Calder said. "They're working a hunting ground," Mercer corrected. "Storms hide them. Storms hide footprints, noise, gunshots, movement. And people trapped in storms are vulnerable." Rook growled softly at the photos, as if recognizing a threat. Mercer turned to Calder. "We need to catch them before someone else ends up tied to a tree, or worse. The weather report says another front is moving in this afternoon. If these 2 follow their pattern, they'll strike again," Calder finished. The plan came together quickly. They would use an unmarked older vehicle resembling a stranded traveler's car. Calder, experienced with mountain patrols and possessing the calm required for undercover work, would drive. Rook would stay in the back seat, equipped with his K9 vest and tracking harness. Other police units would hide 1 to 2 kilometers away, just outside the suspect's likely strike zone, staying off the radios except for a private channel. The point wasn't to stage a dramatic confrontation. It was to intercept a predictable cycle of violence. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened again, heavy with the promise of fresh snow. Calder drove the decoy vehicle up Ridgepoint Pass, steering carefully along the serpentine road. Rook sat upright in the back, silent, watching the falling dusk with eyes that absorbed everything. Minutes passed. Then, footprints by the side of the road. A parked truck ahead. Hood up. 2 figures emerging from the blowing snow. Travis Klein approached first. He wore a frayed jacket, too thin for the cold, his face gaunt beneath an uneven beard. His eyes shifted nervously from Calder to the truck and back, as though he were forcing himself to play a role he no longer wanted. Hank Dillard approached slower, limping slightly, one hand hidden in his pocket. His expression carried none of Travis's uncertainty. It was the emptiness of someone who believed winter existed for the strong to exploit. Calder lowered his window halfway. "You stuck?" he asked, with a tone of cautious friendliness typical of stranded mountain travelers. Travis gestured awkwardly. "Yeah. Engine trouble. Mind giving us a hand? We can't call for help." But Hank's eyes were already narrowing. They were the eyes of a predator, recognizing something just slightly wrong. Then everything happened at once. Hank reached for a weapon. Travis startled. Rook exploded into motion. At Calder's command, short, sharp, "Get back!" The German Shepherd surged from the back seat, intercepting Hank's gun arm with perfect precision. The first shot fired into the air, lost in the storm's winds. Calder rolled out of the driver's side, radio already in his hand. "Shots fired! Suspects engaged! Move in!" Travis dropped his weapon instantly and stumbled backward, shouting that he didn't want to do this. Hank fought the dog, then tore free and sprinted toward the forest, disappearing into the white blur. Calder's heart hammered, but training overtook fear. He secured the young man, checked Rook for injuries. Only a graze, shallow but bleeding, and signaled the backup units. Travis was taken alive. Hank Dillard vanished into the woods. The storm swallowed him whole, but the mountain never lets a man run forever. Night folded over Frost Haven like a heavy curtain, thick with the hush that follows crisis. In the ambulance bay of the medical center, orange lights cast gentle halos across the snowdrifts, turning the winter night into a stage of quiet, flickering hope. Calder Hale walked beside the K-9 transport unit, its back doors already open as the veterinary contracted nurse prepared space for Rook. The German Shepherd stood patiently, though his breathing was tight with pain, shoulder grazed, fur matted with blood that had frozen into dark crystals. Yet, even injured, he carried himself like he refused to bend to winter. "Easy, boy," Calder murmured, lowering a hand to stroke him between the ears. Rook pushed his head gently into Calder's palm, the gesture small but filled with unwavering trust. The vet nurse, a woman in her 50s named Marla Tayson with silver hair braided down her back, stepped forward. "Let's get him inside," she said in a firm maternal voice. "Gun grazes aren't deep, but they can hide infection. And the cold won't help." Rook allowed her to lift his injured leg slightly, though he cast Calder an expression that was unmistakably dog-like irritation, as if being assisted offended his sense of dignity. Calder huffed a soft laugh. "He's still got his pride," he said. Marla smiled. "Pride's good. Pride fights infection better than half my medicine." Inside the K-9 care room at Frost Haven Medical, a small team was already setting up. A contract veterinarian, Dr. Wynn, a thin man with a pointed gray beard and glasses fogged at the edges, along with 2 technicians preparing fluids, saline, and a portable X-ray unit. Their movements were brisk but calm, the kind of practiced rhythm belonging to those who dealt daily with pain, fragile health, and hope intermixed. Rook was lifted carefully onto the metal exam table. Calder stood beside him, one hand on the dog's side, grounding him. Dr. Wynn examined the wound, muttering observations under his breath. "No fracture, surface tear, clean graze, lucky dog." Calder smirked. He'd say the same about himself. Wynn looked up. "He needs rest. No field work for several days, but he'll walk by morning." Calder bowed his head, relief loosening a knot he hadn't realized had formed beneath his ribs. "Thank you." When Rook was finally bandaged, white wrap snug against tan and black fur, the dog grumbled once, a sound somewhere between annoyance and pride. Calder slid an arm under him and helped him down. Rook touched his nose to Calder's wrist before walking on 3 steady legs into the resting kennel, curling in the blanket provided. His amber eyes stayed open just long enough to meet Calder's gaze. "He'll be okay. He'll fight. He always does." Calder let the quiet reassurance settle before turning back toward the corridor. There was more work to do, work no dog could help with. Meanwhile, in the precinct's operations room, Lieutenant Frank Mercer and a half-dozen officers gathered around a large topographic map of Bear Crest Ridge. Notes, photos, and sketches crowded the board. The storm had swallowed Hank Dillard, yes, but the mountain offered hiding places for the desperate and the wounded. Cabins abandoned by hunters, old mine shafts sealed but not forgotten, natural caves warmed by geothermal pockets, and animal dens large enough for a man to take temporary refuge. Mercer pointed his pen at a ringed area on the northeastern side. "This is where heat signatures appeared on the drone sweep. Could be an animal," he warned, but it lines up with Travis Klein's statement. Travis, who survived the encounter, had been stitched up and questioned. He recounted enough details of Hank's paranoia, his understanding of the terrain, and his preference for high ground to give the officers the beginning of a map, a pattern drawn by fear, desperation, and cold strategy. Calder arrived just as Mercer finished briefing. "You good to move?" Mercer asked, eyes narrowing with concern. Calder nodded. "Rook's stable. He'll sit this one out, but I'm ready." The team assembled. Officers from night shift, 2 SAR specialists, and 2 medics trained for cold weather extractions. They gathered thermal cameras, radios, avalanche probes, and rescue sleds. No one carried illusions of cinematic confrontation. They carried preparation and reality. Bear Crest Ridge awaited. The drive to the ridge took 20 minutes. The climb on foot took longer. The wind grew sharper as altitude increased until it felt like the air itself was made of tiny knives. Snow draped the pine branches so heavily they drooped like the shoulders of worn giants. The terrain turned uneven, old rock formations rising like broken fortresses, with small sheltered patches of land that could hide a chilled body for hours. Calder stepped ahead, flashlight beams slicing through the shadows. A faint signature flickered on the thermal scanner held by SAR member Rowan Hale. "There," Rowan whispered, "inside that rock outcrop." Mercer signaled everyone into silent approach. They circled the formation, half cave, half hollowed crevice. The wind howled overhead, but the hollow was quiet, too quiet. When they found Hank Dillard, he was slumped against the stone wall, legs sprawled, breath thin. His coat was crusted with ice, his beard stiff with frozen condensation. Hypothermia had pulled most strength from his limbs, leaving his eyes glassy. He didn't reach for a weapon because he no longer had one. He didn't run because he no longer could. Winter had done what bullets might have. Mercer approached cautiously. "Hank Dillard," he said, voice low but firm. "You're under arrest." Hank blinked, barely conscious. "Cold," he rasped. "Yes," Mercer answered. "That's what happens when you run from law." And nature at the same time. The extraction was practiced, quiet, professional. Medics wrapped Hank in insulated blankets and lifted him onto a rescue sled. He did not struggle. He didn't speak again. The mountain had rendered its judgment. Back at Frost Haven Medical, the air was softer, warmer, kinder. Rook lay in his kennel with his head resting on his paws, bandaged shoulder rising and falling in slow, steady motions. Down the hall, baby Noah Maddox was being transferred out of NICU into a standard newborn care room. His cheeks were no longer pale but tinged with rose, like the first dawn light creeping over snow. Doctors and nurses moved with hushed, relieved energy. Families in waiting rooms exchanged smiles, as if the survival of one tiny child had momentarily lifted the entire town. Evan and Hannah Maddox were recovering steadily. Their limbs had regained color. They could sit up without dizziness. Hannah's hair, once stiff with ice, had been gently combed by Lila the night before. Evan's strength was returning, though his voice still carried the rasp of Cold's lingering touch. It took several days, 3 long ones, for doctors to approve their reunion with Noah, but on that afternoon, sunlight filtered through hospital windows in long, golden bars. The snow outside glittered instead of threatened. Calder walked quietly behind the nurses as they guided Evan and Hannah down the hall. Hannah held her breath when she saw Noah through the window. Evan's hand tightened around hers. When the nurse finally placed their baby in her arms, her shoulders shook. Part sob, part disbelief, part pure gratitude. Evan leaned close, touching Noah's tiny fingers with trembling hands. Across the hall, Calder watched silently. Rook, slow but walking on his healing shoulder, leaned against his leg. Lila Bennett approached from the side, 2 coffees in hand. She offered one to Calder. "They're going to tell this story to that boy for the rest of his life." Calder took the cup, steam rising into the air like soft ghosts. "He's going to think the dog was the hero." Rook chose that moment to nudge Calder's hand with impeccable timing. Lila laughed, a warm, musical sound that softened the memory of snowstorms. Maybe he's right. For the first time in days, Calder allowed himself to smile back. Outside the hospital, the wind had calmed. The mountain watched in silence, its fury spent, its blessings made visible. Winter, even in its cruelty, had allowed something rare to survive. But Winter wasn't the only one who had fought for them. Winter lingered over Frost Haven, the way an old song lingers in the mind long after the last note has faded. The mountains still wore their crowns of snow, the pines still bowed under white weight, and the wind still carried the crisp scent of ice and cedar. Yet something in the air had changed. The storm that once roared with the voice of a feral beast now murmured like a tired guardian. Snowflakes fell with gentler rhythm, drifting through the streets as though the season itself had softened. A month had passed since the night Calder Hale found baby Noah Maddox alone in the overturned SUV. The town had healed in patches, slow, deliberate, like frost retreating from a window pane. The hospital no longer buzzed with urgent footsteps. Patrol routes were steady again. Even the mountains seemed to exhale relief. And inside the Frost Haven Community Hall, an old timber building with warm lights and hand-carved rafters, a small crowd gathered. Not the kind that filled stadiums or demanded grand speeches. Just neighbors, families, officers, nurses, and the quiet souls who weathered every winter together. The hall smelled faintly of pine sap and hot cider, scents that softened even the coldest memories. Calder stood near the back, hands tucked into the pockets of a clean uniform jacket, Rook sitting proudly beside him. The German shepherd's shoulder had healed well. Only a small patch of shaved fur marked where the bandage had been. His posture was regal, tail resting neatly around his paws, amber eyes sweeping over the room with the practiced watchfulness of a guardian who had never truly gone off duty. "Everyone fits?" Lieutenant Frank Mercer called from the front, adjusting the microphone that squealed briefly. He wore a suit instead of his usual patrol jacket, though his posture remained unmistakably that of a seasoned officer. His iron-gray hair caught the overhead lights like a frost crown. People settled into wooden chairs, parents with children on their laps, elderly couples holding hands, teens slouched with winter hats still on. Winter coats rustled softly like wings folding in a roost. Mercer cleared his throat. "We're here today," he began, "not for ceremony, not for spectacle, but for gratitude. In places like Frost Haven, winter gives us no guarantees, but we have each other, and sometimes," his gaze drifted toward Calder, "we have more than that." A few murmurs of agreement rose through the audience. "This past month," Mercer continued, "we survived one of the worst storms in recent memory, and in that storm, lives were saved, because some people refused to look away when help was needed, because a team worked as one, because a dog named Rook doesn't know the meaning of giving up." A small laugh rippled through the hall as Rook lifted his head, almost proudly. Mercer lifted a small box from the podium. "Calder Hale, would you come forward?" Calder felt his spine stiffen slightly. Not from nerves, but from the unease of being made the center of attention. He preferred quiet corridors, mountain roads, and the company of one loyal dog over applause. Still, he stepped forward with steady pace, Rook rising to trot beside him. When they reached the front, Mercer opened the box and removed a medal. "This," he said, "is the county's Medal of Service, awarded not for heroism alone, but for unwavering duty in the harshest circumstances." Calder accepted it quietly. No speech, no flourish, just a nod, simple and grounded. "Now," Mercer continued, turning with a softer expression, "for the officer who didn't wear a badge, but earned one." Rook tilted his head. The hall laughed again. Mercer lifted a second item from the box, a small metal plate shaped like a German shepherd's head, mounted onto a leather collar tag. Engraved across the top, K9 Commendation. Calder knelt as Mercer fastened it gently to Rook's collar. The dog puffed out his chest with unmistakable pride. A wave of warmth filled the hall. It was the kind of moment that made even the winter-battered hearts in the audience feel lifted, lighter. In the front row, Evan and Hannah Maddox sat with baby Noah sleeping peacefully in Hannah's arms, his small cheeks rosy with warmth. They looked stronger, bodies recovered, spirits no longer fraying at the edges. Evan's arm rested protectively behind his family. Hannah's eyes glistened with gratitude. When the ceremony ended, people rose from their seats, crowding around to shake Calder's hand, or kneel to scratch Rook's ears. Children asked for pictures. Adults offered casseroles or pies as thanks. Calder accepted each gesture with quiet grace. Evan Maddox eventually stepped forward, extending a firm hand. He was a tall man, still carrying the faint tiredness of recovery, but with a new steadiness, as though gratitude had given him back his footing. "We don't just owe you our lives," Evan said softly. "We owe you our future. Noah's future. Calder shook his hand. You fought to survive that night. I only helped you finish the journey. Hannah approached next, Noah tucked close to her chest. We'll never forget what you and Rook did, she whispered. Her eyes shifted to the dog. Someday, when he grows up, Noah's going to know who saved him. Rook leaned forward and licked Noah's tiny hand, causing the baby to stretch in a sleepy flutter. Calder smiled lightly. Tell him Rook was the hero. I just drove the car. As if on cue, Rook nudged his handler's elbow, sending a ripple of laughter through them. Lila Bennett joined them a moment later, 2 cups of hot coffee wrapped between gloved hands. Warm light softened her features, hazel eyes, gentle smile, tired but luminous. She handed 1 cup to Calder. Don't worry, she teased. This time you're drinking coffee after the storm, not before you run into one. Calder raised a brow. I prefer it that way. Lila laughed, a light melodic sound that carried through the bustling hall. Rook sat neatly between them, head tilted as if expecting them to take a commemorative photo. The 3 of them, man, dog, nurse, stood like a quiet portrait of resilience, unaware that others in the hall looked upon them with the same fondness usually reserved for family snapshots. Outside, the sun dipped lower, casting a faint golden glow across the thinning snow. Long shadows stretched across the sidewalks where patches of dark pavement had begun to show, the first hints that winter was loosening its grip. Calder stepped outside for a moment of quiet. Frost Haven's main street was washed in amber light from old-fashioned lanterns. Snow piled against storefronts sparkled like crushed diamonds. The mountains in the distance no longer looked like threats, but like sleeping giants at peace. He drew in a long breath of crisp air. Rook stood beside him, tail swaying lightly. You ready to go home? Calder asked. Rook barked once, short, warm, conversational. Calder chuckled. Yeah, me too. They walked along the sidewalk, leaving footprints that pressed into melting snow. Not prints of survivors fleeing a storm, nor tracks of hunters chasing danger, but marks of 2 companions heading toward whatever quiet awaited after a long, unforgiving season. And as they disappeared into the warm glow of the setting winter sun, the mountains behind them stood silent, not as witnesses of tragedy, but as guardians of a story that would be told for generations. The storm had struck, the cold had threatened, but light, winter's quiet, persistent light, had found a way through. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with thunder or bright light. Sometimes they come through the courage of a tired officer, the loyalty of a faithful dog, or the kindness of strangers who refuse to turn away. In this story, we are reminded that even in the coldest moments of our lives, God never forgets us. He sends help in ways we do not expect, and strength we did not know we had. In our everyday lives, we face storms of our own moments of fear, uncertainty, or loneliness. Yet God walks with us through every valley and every winter. When we choose compassion, when we choose faith, when we choose hope, we become part of the quiet miracles He places in this world. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment to tell us your thoughts, and remember to subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and love. May God bless you and your family always. And if you feel grateful for the miracles He brings into your life, type Amen in the comments.